Yeah, so what I found surprising in my research for the book on Thorson, it's not only is it never one player involved in the alleged crime, it's always never one issue. So even though thimerosal and MMR vaccines have been put out front and center, and only Simpsonwood was the secret meeting which shouldn't happen, between industry and the government, but never told to the public. There was actually a meeting on aluminum 3 weeks before offshore in Puerto Rico at San Juan, and it was the same players at Simpsonwood were more or less the same players there, and they realized aluminum was a much bigger potential problem than thimerosal, and they realized the only way to deal with it was not change how the adjuvants work, but basically change the messaging. And what they realized then in the transcripts, which is the first chapter of my book, is that they had to control the message. They had to get out in front. And they also knew that the media, for whatever reason, wasn't covering this third axis to the vaccine autism issue. On top of that, I would learn that Colleen Boyle, who is one of the people who's Diana Shandel's boss at the CDC, who today is the director of the National Centers of Birth Defects and Developmental Disabilities, NCBDDD, was back in 1984 the principal investigator, the PI, for the Agent Orange studies that was put out there for Congress. They were given $71 million, 7-year timeline, go out there. Here's the information from Operation Ranch Hand on the flight patterns. Here are the troop movements on the ground. And the CDC said the 5 years were basically finding no association. And Congress would bring them in and say, what's the story? Why not? And then they said, well, we don't have the real troop movements. We can't find these historical records. And of course, the Army had the historical records up in Harrisburg, New York, or outside Harrisburg somewhere, some warehouse. And the CDC, well, we can't go there. And what they ended up doing was they quit the study. They left $20 million, right, more than a quarter of the study, and left 2 years early. So what government agency ever goes under budget and quits and walks away? Only when you don't want to find out the truth. And so instead of Colleen Boyle and her in the Klan and Frank DiStefano, who was involved in it, Frank DiStefano was involved in the Thompson study. These people were promoted. They weren't fired. They weren't kicked out. They weren't removed. They weren't demoted. They were actually, over the years, would be promoted. So lo and behold, once they had this template of no association between a toxin and a victim, they would reuse this 15 years later in the year 2000 and thereafter, that vaccine toxins and all the stuff that's in it, the bad stuff, and the autistic children epidemic, they said there's no association there. Well, this continues, this kind of tyranny, this kind of false science, this bad data, this corruption, has continued with the swine flu epidemic, which was no epidemic nor a pandemic in 2009. It continued with supposedly a wild virus of the, what do you call that? Tuberculosis, I think it was, which wasn't an issue either. 2014, the real issue of Ebola coming in, and what is the CDC? When they actually have a real emergency, they fumbled it. And they got nurses sick in this country, which should never have happened because they used the wrong contamination suits. I mean, so basically CDC had no protocol in place for triage in hospitals in the country to deal with Ebola, which is kind of shocking since this is supposed to be the front line of protection for the United States people. So what gets interesting is in 2015, the CDC has a new boogeyman. The new boogeyman is called Zika. Zika does not cause microcephaly. There's no proof it causes microcephaly. There's no evidence it causes microcephaly. And the only microcephaly clusters in the world, not microcephaly all over, in the world is in northeast Brazil, and go 100 miles west of northeast Brazil into mosquito country, deeper into the Amazon jungle. We have plenty of mosquitoes, and you have the Zika virus. There's no microbabies there. Why is that? Because Zika does not cause microcephaly. But instead of being honest with the American people, or instead of actually investigating what are the 5 or 6 or 7 potential causes of the microcephaly with the babies being born in northeast Brazil, they don't do that. All they're worried about now is Zika, extracting $1 billion, which they did from U.S. Congress. It's a very dumb move on their part for vaccines we will never need. So it's kind of shocking. And when Florida State University at the end of August came out with a antidote, which is a tapeworm antidote for either to reduce or lessen or eliminate Zika from an infected person. Does the mainstream media cover this? Absolutely not. Kind of shocking, I think.